Hi, everyone. My name is Lisa Carey Moore, and welcome to Embodied Carbon 101. This session is on procurement, and it is the 7th session of a series that Boston Society for Architecture started back in June, and it will continue through August. The goal of this series is to provide foundational knowledge in different impact areas. So hopefully everyone who attends one of the sessions or all of the sessions comes away feeling empowered to do better on embodied carbon. As I said, I'm Lisa Carey Moore. I'm a senior sustainability consultant with Integrated Eco Strategy, and I've spent a lot of time working on materials and material product chemistry. I'm pleased to be joined today by 3 speakers. Brian Hayes, co-founder of Bellwether Craftsmen. It's a Vermont-based company that offers a range of consulting, design, and construction services. Michael Orbank, who's a sustainability lead and assistant project manager at Commodore Builders, a mid-sized construction firm here in Boston. And Stacy Smedley, sustainability director at SKANSKA USA in Seattle and executive director of Building Transparency, the nonprofit that launched the EC3 tool. Our sponsors today are Arc Woods and Services, Goody Clancy, Huber Engineered Woods, Kingspan, Nordic Structures, Select Building Products, and Thoughtforms. So we really want to thank these guys for supporting this series and making it possible. We'd also like to thank our partners, Built Environment Plus, the International Living Future Institute, and the Structural Engineering Institute. Also want to give a shout out to our supporting knowledge community, the Carbon Leadership Forum, based out at the University of Washington, but we now have a Boston hub. And wherever you are, we hope you join the Carbon Leadership Forum and can be part of the movement to make sure that embodied carbon is at the forefront of our design build decisions. You can get continuing education credit today. You just need to fill out the form that there will be a link provided in the chat box, and you give us your AIA number, email address, and your name. And if you're not looking for AIA continuing education, you can still get a certificate. Just fill out that form. We're recording the session today, and it will be made available after, probably later this week, as will the slides be made available to you. And here is the agenda, and hopefully we'll touch upon each of these points today. We plan to have a fairly robust question and answer session and period, so please make sure you fill out your questions, or if you have clarifying questions, please put them in the QA, and I will try to get them to the speakers as soon as I can. So I thought I'd start today just by setting the stage. It should be obvious, but procurement is when the product's impact on the project becomes permanent, right? Once we procure that product and put it in our building, then we've embedded those emissions, and it's part of the carbon footprint of our project. And of course, if we replace that product over time, like for an interiors project, then we continue to add to emissions over the building's lifespan. So if you're involved in procurement from an operations and maintenance point of view, it's something to consider as well. I wanted to share this image because making the point of we have to consider carbon early, and that has been a theme for all of the sessions to date, and I imagine it will be a theme for today's session as well as the ones down the road. It's not enough to come up with 20 products sometime during the construction document phase and get EPDs and maybe figure out if we have a better product in the mix in a product category. We really need to be deliberate about our intentions from the start of a project. This graph is from a 2013 report done by the UK, and they have a very aggressive and legally binding emissions target for an 80% reduction by 2050. So in looking at the sector of infrastructure, they came up with this graph, and basically on the x-axis you have project development stages from planning through operation and maintenance. And on the y-axis, you have the carbon reduction potential over time. And what you can see is that, you know, if we take things on early, our potential for having a greater impact is much higher. So too is it if we decide that we don't need to build a new building. You know, perhaps there's something that can be done with existing buildings and structures to utilize the materials that are there in place to save on the carbon emissions by not creating something new. And then obviously there's a whole continuum here of, you know, doing a little bit less well, a little bit less well, and, you know, a little bit less well. So this is all to say, tackle carbon early. The Carbon Leadership Forum is really an amazing repository of information for everyone from the novice on the topic to those who are looking for data sets to assess their own work. And they have a number of resources, including one called A Roadmap to Reducing Building Life Cycle Impacts. And in that roadmap, it's a fairly large image, so it doesn't fit too well on a slide, but basically they go through all of the project phases and elaborate on sort of where impacts can be made and where carbon can be considered. So this is sort of a synopsis of that, if you will. And, you know, to optimize the project, there's a lot of the design team here, right? You have a new versus a retrofit of a building, a smaller footprint, program efficiency, you know, you design spaces that can be used for multiple purposes instead of designing more square footage for unique space, for unique spaces to be had. When we get into the optimized system, this is where I think those who are involved in procurement, especially for new construction and renovation projects, really can have a hand in the matter. And that's where we start thinking about alternate materials, right? Builders are experts in materials, and you know materials in a way that because you install them and because you have to deconstruct and reinstall in a way that you have access to a lot of information. You also get to think about the life cycle, maybe not strictly in terms of life cycle analysis, but in terms of, you know, how long will a product last and what happens to it at the end of the product's life. So in terms of doing better by creating systems that can be deconstructed well and recycled well. This was a strategy that came up last week in our interiors session, where we know interiors turn over every 5, 8, 10 years, and that really has a substantial cumulative impact. So if we can reduce the amount of waste from sort of by using materials that can be part of a circular economy, we can really make substantial gains. And finally, we have optimized procurement. And this is something that I think all of our speakers, but especially Stacy, will be delving into deeply. So I'm not going to say anything more. So right now I'm going to turn it over to Brian, and Brian's gonna pick it up and run with it.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Can you see my screen there? Just making sure.
Yes, we can.
All right, you know, I'm gonna jump right in and share. Our perspective represents that of a small design build firm that enjoys the benefits of having a continuous presence through many, if not all, the stages of a given project from design to finish. Our size and specific focus also allows us to be nimble and able to change course or adapt quickly with minimal disruption. The drawbacks are limited bulk purchase power and an inability to have a broad-based impact on the industry. We aren't building many of these units, certainly not hundreds, only a few a year, and so we have a lot to lose. From an annual gross sales perspective, our eggs are in relatively few baskets, and so we do well recognize how new approaches and change of operation can be a challenge. Our primary motivating factor and our collective concern, same as everyone here, is with climate crisis and need to promote substantial changes towards both the social and environmental injustices currently prevalent in our industry. I acquired this first slide from a PHI presentation on climate change given by Dr. Wolfgang Feist. This simple graphic really well illustrates and conveys our path options for the future. And as you can see, we're already a little bit late, but we still have time given immediate focus and action, which I find incredibly encouraging. The second graphic here shows the business as usual. So the GDP versus the glide path scenario, if you will. And so you can see in this space of complacency, there is a lot of work to be done to bring things down to where we need to be. And straight away, I would like to underscore the importance of the role recycling and waste reduction plays in the carbon cycle. Very important. It can function to keep embodied carbon in the service use, avoid the disposal where the carbon is ultimately released. And as an important contextual reference, I find this slide helpful because it brackets the general ECO2 low and high ranges for both the multi and single family residential projects. A point of interest to note is that the relationship of the value across the application of code compliant versus high performance really jumps out at you. We can clearly identify that the drawdown potential is there, but we also have a well-meaning problematic area where we build single family residential high performance with little attention to the carbon. So I think this is a great reference to come back to moving forward. So how do we procure? Big question. And while I certainly don't have the answers or all of them, I have a lot to learn and understand. Hopefully I can impart a few helpful points to move forward with. Transition from business as usual to the best of your ability. Find ways to continue to improve over time. And this is not an easy task. We've found that we really need to motivate ourselves and each other in the absence of energy and building codes that do not adequately account for upfront carbon values. And while incremental improvements are certainly being made, I believe the onus is upon the industry leaders to engage a targeted process to integrate EC specifications into our projects ahead of those future improved energy and building codes, and in such a way that we create a market with more available low carbon materials. And understanding the need to transition embodied carbon awareness and accounting from a concept or an ideal to an actual practice is critically important. An example of something we can do to get started right now without calculating anything is to touch back with the recycle and reduction of waste, substitute synthetics for plant-based materials, use FSC wood products, reduce building size, and one that I believe is a great starter is to get into the habit or initiate the practice of obtaining EPDs, environmental product declaration documents, for all of the products that you use. And if you have favorite materials that don't have an EPD, contact your manufacturers or sellers, providers to get those documents so that we can amass our database with this information. The integrated design and development is an invaluable approach toward the low EC construction success. And it is always better to have folks involved from the beginning for obvious reasons. But how we achieve our energy goals matter. It really does. And absolutely, a continued focus on operational energy is required, but we'll be missing a meaningful opportunity if we do not bring upfront carbon accounting and drawdown goals into our design and construction approaches. Integrated design really enhances clarity and understanding, which inputs directly to project efficiency and cost containment. And for example, it is very easy in high performance to oversize space conditioning and ventilation. It is very easy to make subcontractors intimidated with new methodologies that they're not used to. And when you have an intimidation or a lack of understanding, you have a perceived liability. And when you have perceived liability, you get elevated bids. So I really believe that the extra upfront work in integrated design and development will pay dividends in making these projects possible down the road at affordable cost. Set up achievable goals early to promote this transition away from business as usual. It's a huge step in the right direction. And here are a few prompts to consider. In the interest of time, I'm not going to go through them all, but you can always refer back to this if you're so inclined. Now, this slide shows one approach that we have used successfully in the past, and it helps clients navigate comparative analysis of conventional approach to a alternate proposal. And hopefully that alternate proposal is low carbon. But the values in this example are not as important as the attempt to unpack the building components into manageable bits to facilitate that linear cost comparison. And as we can see here, the metric is general square footage with associated R values. The term basic assembly cost is defined as material layers comprising the walls and roof assemblies only. And so combining these yields a basic cost total. To avoid confusion, we omitted the door and window openings, facades, finishes, all the extraneous. We just wanted to focus on the thermal component for this building. And while there are many ways to approach and present this, I think I would just like to underscore that the importance of unpacking and truly understanding the actual value to cost ratio when comparing these assemblies is very important. And we've also found that if you break it down that far and when it's all out on the table, it's a great segue or an opportunity to have those meaningful education discussions and debates towards, figuring out what is what and why. And so many times the important part is why. And once people understand, they're more inclined to move forward doing those right things. This is another slide with the same approach. And the reason I present this one is because these two projects were in the parallel paths in the design queue, but they were to be built at separate times, different schedules there. But what we were able to do because they were in design and because we were early and we got our contracts in order, we were able to purchase all the materials in bulk, which was a great help for us. It was tremendously helpful toward cost competitiveness against the conventional option. And we also chose to pass along these products, or these materials in this case, with no markup. And so because we believe that our company education, evolution, and mission was consistent with that. And this is an area where I would invite others to consider adopting a similar view, which may provide options to incentivize alternatives for your clients. And there's an interesting thing you might be able to do here if your company is trying to develop themselves. You might transfer some of those funds over to your operational budget for marketing and education as you develop that new skill set and that offering. Here we can see a cost analysis of that project, and you can see that we were very close but you can also recognize that the helpfulness of breaking out that cold roof assembly so that we didn't confuse. Often SIPs come with a non-vented roof. A vapor open assembly really needs a vented roof. So when we are comparing those basic assemblies, you could see how breaking that down into its very basic terms was helpful. It's a little the other Jones project shows that, and here we have the top 5 materials that you can get started with. FSC certified wood. Not all wood is the same, and that is very true. Natural building materials, cellulose insulation, cross-laminated timbers, and wood fiber insulation. All great things to use. Things to de-emphasize or avoid if you can, or at least keep in perspective at a minimum: aluminum, concrete, steel, refrigerants, and spray foam.
Okay, so I think we're done. Brian's done, and I think now we're gonna pass the torch. Brian, were you gonna share any of your project slides, or are you gonna wait until later?
Whoop, I cut out a little bit there. Apologies.
Okay.
Yeah. How were you on time? I didn't.
You have about a minute, so if you wanted to share some of
Yeah,
your photos, but probably not all of them.
I think you can. They'll be available for people to review if they'd like, and we can just move on. That'd be fine with
Great.
me. All right.
Okay. Super. Thanks. All right. So, Michael.
Hopefully this is all good. Here we go. Hello everyone. My name is Michael Orbank. I'm a assistant project manager and also sustainability lead at Commodore Builders, mid-sized construction management firm over in Waltham, just outside of Boston. I'm coming to you guys today to talk about procurement because it's really what CMs do best. It really kind of engulfs nearly everything we do. And just talking about how Commodore is starting to really think about sustainability and embodied carbon in how we're doing procurement. So as stated here, procurement is kind of the bread and butter of most of the CM's work. I have a spreadsheet up for you. You're not meant to really see it, but really understand the complexity that this is probably about 1/10 of the form that we're all going and filling out, having everything from when everything's coming in, when the design process approved it and going through. And in these spreadsheets that I know every CM has, all proprietary, we're already getting tracking information from subcontractors and manufacturers. So we kind of know from tit to tat where everything is and where it's all going. And using this procurement log and procurement status, we have a very good relationship with contractors that also can trickle down to manufacturers. And through all of this learning and gaining information, I've started to ask my company and the projects I'm on, where can we add info for embodied carbon? Because it's part of the products we're getting, it's part of the products we're installing. So when it becomes a priority, as it is, where do we put this? And as you can clearly see with the many, many headings, it wouldn't be that much more difficult to add these in. So one thing I've learned in kind of my crusade to add sustainability, to promote reductions in embodied carbon is realizing that you just have to ask questions. It seems so simple to hear me say that, but it goes a really, really long way. Without asking questions, I would have never realized that on multiple projects that I've been on myself is that owners are starting to prioritize sustainability. And many CMs don't know that if it's not specifically listed in the specifications or when we're bidding in the RFP. But it is there, and more large companies, more smaller companies, what have you, across the gambit, institutional, life sciences, it's becoming a priority to them. So asking the questions early, as Brian had mentioned, and as Lisa had said, is sustainability important? What are your goals? And then once we're on the project, kind of understanding the specified materials. So going through, CMs do this all the time, in making these procurement logs and really understanding and biting into the project, we have to understand what exactly is specified, and kind of going through that and just having something in your mind to know, okay, well, what can be done differently? Like I said, bring up the conversation early, making sure that everyone knows your goals sooner rather than later, because that's when you can make the most amount of impact. And then on the topic of asking questions, asking subcontractors for EPDs is something that I had never done until a little while ago. And I've been kind of blown away by what exactly the responses are, because a lot of subcontractors are going, well, we don't really know what that is, especially in the Boston area. So asking those questions, having them ask their manufacturers where they're getting these products from, and kind of spurring this conversation to start really regionally getting these EPDs in the Boston area, in the area where you guys are at, and starting the conversation there. So in going through the procurement process, there's ways to lower embodied carbon, there's ways to bring it in the conversation and to really bring it to the forefront. Some steps that I have through trial and error discovered on my projects is, first and foremost, what most CMs do is fully understanding the scope and constructability. This is what everyone has to do, every CM has to do anyways, but it takes an additional step when you're looking at also at embodied carbon, because you understand the scope, and therefore you can start to understand, well, what changes can be made without getting into constructability concerns, without getting into procurement concerns. Two would be expressing ideas for change and opportunities on what is specified, and really kind of bringing the conversation to the owner, to the design team. More and more design firms and design teams are starting to understand that carbon needs to be considered and need to go in a sustainable direction. But in case they don't, having another fail-safe of the CM making it a priority and really talking through it. As Brian had mentioned with kind of the IPD approach, having a common understanding and kind of a meeting of the minds with the owner, CM and design team has always been beneficial. I've never been on a project that it's been a bad idea or led to something bad if everyone's kind of working together towards that goal and bringing up that sustainability, that lower embodied carbon goal, asking what can be done better and what products should be avoided. In my experience, it's a very similar decision-making process to value engineering. And here, instead of reducing the price, you're looking to say, hey, what can we do to reduce the carbon? And going through, doesn't always have to be a line-by-line kind of discussion as sometimes value engineering is, but really understanding, okay, here are the big items. Look what we have for missed metals, or look what we have for, we're doing a kitchen or a cafeteria. We're getting all these products from who knows where, across the ocean. And really asking those questions of, can this be done better? Four would definitely be including subcontractors in this discussion to see options. Oh, hey, my tin knocker, I know you're getting this huge pan from somewhere, like I said, overseas or somewhere down south. Can we get it locally? Can you source this somewhere else? And then kind of rolling into 5, managing the procurement and really attempting to limit the over manufacturing and the over transportation. I was speaking about a cafeteria because that was a recent project I was on. There was a French oven which was specified from France, and we were having a heck of a time getting it for just its own reasons, the regular procurement, and we also realized that it would be taking, to get it on time, we'd have to not only ship it across the ocean, but fly it. And just the huge transportation embodied carbon concerns of having this manufactured across in Europe, in France itself. And through a lot of my own legwork, we found out that a extremely similar product, same specifications for the kitchen, could be found in Costa Rica of all places. So we ended up going with that and eliminating the entire trip of the manufacturing all over the ocean, and just getting something local, reducing transportation, and you know, it can be that easy. You just have to ask questions. And kind of for my last slide, just knowing that you have to prioritize sustainability and really being an advocate. I've been told sometimes, hey, like it really shines in how you speak and how you kind of present yourself with lowering embodied carbon and really making it a priority. But I feel like everyone can do that. And it's really knowing that there are alternatives, that you need to ask questions, and that everyone from CMs to designers can kind of learn how the industry, where it's going, the different products that are coming out, and sharing, along with asking questions, just being able to be part of the discussion, no matter how small, and keep up with the changes, because this industry, different products are constantly coming out. 2 case studies that I have, one of which was a Cambridge biotech company. Commodore has a carpentry division that installs most of our studs and drywall. And I just asked a question in the middle of an OAC meeting once, hey, there's a recent product that I saw at Greenbelt, the USG EcoSmart gypsum wallboard. Can we use this? And the senior project managers working at the time liked the idea. The owner liked the idea. I went to the supplier over in Waltham, and the entire scope of this 20,000-ish square foot lab reno to replace all the gypsum wallboard with the USG EcoSmart would only be about $200 more for the entire scope And the only reason it was more expensive is because the supplier has the product but has never sold it before because it hasn't had any interest in it. So they were hedging their bets. So in requesting this and requesting an entire project worth, we were able to get it in. I believe the specs are somewhere near, it uses about 20% less water and energy. It's about 25% lighter, and it is the same strength as type C, I believe, which goes on the ceilings and soffits. So it can be used without getting that extra heavy, extra strength drywall. In addition to the drywall, I had asked if we can start a carpet recycling program, and they were over the moon about it, working with the manufacturer of the carpet tiles that were in the actual space being demoed and were actually specified, I believe it was interface, to be replaced. We were able to completely divert that from a landfill and kind of work towards that circular economy. My other case study, there's a Billerica Pharma GMP facility, and Commodore is starting a pilot waste diversion program with site sourcing, site source separating, hoping to divert about 95% of our waste. And then if this is successful, kind of moving it up to other large products. The owners were over the moon hearing about it. And this was another case of where we didn't know the sustainability goals until we asked. The design team didn't know the sustainability goals when working with them. And this is a whole 3-year complete campus contract we had won with them. And through this program and bringing up our own sustainability goals, we were able to work with the design team on this very large campus project and start a specification overhaul, in which we were able to go through with the design team and myself and the project manager on the project and start looking at, hey, this is what has been business as usual. This is what has been typical. Can we do better? And we're finding more and more that we can do better. And it's through asking those questions, it's through making it a priority, and it's through being an advocate. So that is what, from a CM perspective, you can start doing. And I would ask any designers listening to just start looking at specs, start understanding that more and more owners are making it a priority in themselves. Thanks,
Michael. Stacy.
All right, I'm going to pick up where we're kind of left off now and just walk through how both SKANSKA looks at this from a contractor perspective when it comes to our responsibility and role in embodied carbon reduction, as well as how building transparency is supporting and seeing our pilot users and our larger user base start to do this themselves, and just walk through that process. So just first, I think the first thing we all have to do is understand carbon and understand where we can make the most impacts in our role in the AEC industry. And this is the slide I always like to use, because I think just visualizing where carbon is and where it's coming from is a good thing to do. So what you're seeing here is basically, operational carbon, it's energy consumption of buildings, and then embodied carbon is all of these things that really the construction industry, the contractor touches during the course of building a project. And it's because of that it's really, I think, imperative that contractors are part of the conversation and understanding that they are the ones procuring all these materials that are having all these emissions impacts. The way that we really see this starting, it starts at the procurement, and doing it well starts at the very beginning of the job, when you start to understand your client's perspectives on carbon, so that you can actually support them in the decision-making process to give you the levers and the tools you need as a procurer of materials to look at the lower embodied carbon options and also to specify and procure them. So this is just an example of, you have a client, you have a potential project, understand their carbon reduction targets so you can start speaking in their language when you show them embodied carbon impacts. It's really helpful if you have that lens. And this is just an example of how we've started to show embodied carbon, potential embodied carbon at the beginning of a job. So if we know we have a certain square footage of a project that's in a certain location, we can actually take embodied carbon benchmark data from the University of Washington Carbon Leadership Forum benchmarking study, do our kilograms of CO2 per square foot times our square footage, propose an EUI for a project that we know is going to be reasonable, and then use that project's energy grid profile from that place. So this is looking at a commercial building in New York City, the assumed 40 EUI, we were going to a client, we would show them this so that they could understand to 2050 that there's actually just as much carbon emissions in the embodied carbon bucket as the operational bucket. So this again is how we start to frame the conversation to show that we need to be looking at both sides of the carbon equation. Just for a little bit of a interesting nuance, if I pick up this building and I put it in Seattle, what happens is because of our energy grid here in Seattle, most of the emissions are in the embodied carbon side because we've got hydroelectricity and a clean grid. So for projects in Seattle, actually 85% of the emissions of a project to 2050, in this case, a commercial office building, is in that embodied carbon bucket. So if we aren't talking about it and thinking about it, if you have owners that have carbon reduction goals, if they're not looking at this, this kind of is an eye opener for them when they start to see where the impacts are. And that's when we get to the point where they say, okay, you've showed us there's an impact, what do we do about it? So the contractor's role really is, when you look at the stages of embodied carbon, there are the 3 stages. There's the upfront carbon, which is the product and construction process, everything associated with actually manufacturing and installing those products. There's the use stage, which is really how many times you're replacing a product over a building's life cycle. And then there's the end of life stage. So again, from a construction procurement perspective, what we're touching is really this upfront carbon and end of life carbon. And the way that we approach it is really the end of life stage is for the project that we might be tearing down to build the new one. So we pull that up front, even upfront of upfront carbon, so that we're looking at the building that we're demolishing right now, not the one that we may demolish in 30 or 50 years. And what you're seeing here are some percentages that I've thrown on there, the impact, the scale of impact of each category, if you're taking 100% across all 3. So really starting to look at where the larger impacts are within embodied carbon. And just another slide on this. This is a study of a project that was put into Tally, where we took all the stages and then removed the end of life and use stage. So what you're seeing here is the comparative impacts for this one project of the use and end of life stage to that upfront product stage. So there's a particular reason why we are focusing and very urgently attacking this upfront product stage, because it is such a large piece of the overall. The other 2 are important because as this product stage gets smaller, the other 2 stages, again, of course, become a larger piece of the puzzle. So just very briefly, on the end of life, we do track this on some projects. This is an example of a spreadsheet where we are getting to the point where by doing this on enough projects, tracking all the impacts on waste, we're able to get to kind of a pound of CO2 per square foot metrics. We can start to forecast what we may have in terms of embodied carbon emissions of the waste stream. We also try to do as much as we can to reuse materials. So this goes back into the circular economy, but even on a smaller scale, if we are, in this case, demolishing sidewalk, we were able to give this to a urban food forest to use as their retaining walls. So there are always opportunities, similar to the carpet story, to really think about this. And the reason this is important is because it's not only affecting the end of life emissions, but the more we use recycled products and recycle things back into new products, the more we reduce those upfront emissions too, because we are not starting with virgin materials, we're starting with reused materials. So that manufacturing emissions and extraction emission bucket starts to go down. So it is very circular. Watching my time. The construction process stage, we also look at this, even though it's a very small piece of the pie right now. And again, the reason why is because we want to start to be able to forecast what could happen on projects. So this is an example where we're getting to the point now for a project where we can say the demolition is this many pounds of CO2 per square foot. Typically, same for things like all the different categories of installation of materials. So we're tracking this and we're trying to get smarter on it. But really where our focus has been and where Building Transparency's focus is with the EC3 tool is on this upfront product stage, A1 to A3, where really the largest scale of impact lives in a procurement model. So I'm going to walk through how we've seen pilot users engage in this process and really utilize EC3 for specifications and procurement. If you have not registered for it, it is free and open access. So you can go to buildingtransparency.org and just register for free and get access pretty immediately to the tool to do what I'm going to do right now. So what we do and what we have our pilot partners do is actually start by creating a project in EC3. This is really step 1. This is where you can take imports from BIM 360, from Tally if you're doing lifecycle assessment early, or from construction estimates and start a project. You're able to actually put in your line items of your estimates or materials. So this is looking at how you have the description, you have the quantity, and then you click search. That search allows you to search for what you know about that product at this stage. This is typically in design development. You click the search button and you get a sample of the EPDs that are resulting from your search. In this case, because this project's in California, we got a good sample. And we're using that collection to give us basically a range. We're not actually selecting a product yet, but we're saying, okay, there's the baseline that's been established. Here are where all the EPDs are falling in this little green rectangle. So this is 60% of all the returned EPDs. We take a conservative and an achievable number at the 80th and 20th. And what that does is start to do things for you. So it does all the math of the quantities times the carbon emissions of your searches to give you, for your project, a conservative and achievable target for your project. If you click on this little GWP summary button, it's going to pull up a diagram that for your project, based on your quantities and your searches, gives you the relative scale of impact of each material in your project, as well as that reduction potential against the baseline. So this is looking at how much you could actually reduce based on the current EPDs in the database that are real products. This rolls up to an actual project level reduction. This is taking that 20th percentile, so there's still 20% of products below. We're not taking the lowest. And it's giving you a chance to set a target or have a client begin to set targets and allow you to actually optimize the project to achieve a reduction, not just track. Step 2 is really see if your preferred typical suppliers have EPDs. The first, I think you heard this already, but we need environmental product declarations to be able to procure smartly around carbon. So the first thing you can do in EC3 is go to find and compare materials. I'm looking at rebar. I've clicked down on the rebar button, and you can do a search. I'll go into the tool in a second if we have time, but if the project, you'll see here that it's actually farther down, sorry, I'm a little out of order, but if the search results in nothing, part of step 2 is asking for EPDs. So on the Building Transparency website, you can actually click on EC3 and documents and get to templated EPD request letters. This is very important. We all need to be doing this. We are seeing just by asking that manufacturers are getting on board, and the more time they get the same ask, the more incentivized they are to do so. So please go there to the website, download the template, and begin to request EPDs if they're not in the database. The second thing is if you do have EPDs returned, use them. So this is where I've done my search. It's given me my samples. I've clicked them to compare. So I'm seeing my 6 rebar suppliers that are in Washington. I can see that they're all really good because we're all on the good electric grid and using a lot of recycled content, but Nucor actually is the best. So can I start to look at my procurement and my specs to either have a basis of design supplier for rebar, or can I start to set limits or reductions based on this data? So this is an example of a template that is in development for specifications where it would have template language that could apply to any material and allow you to start to do things like set a basis of design and a declared product. Step 3 is don't forget the bid documents. It's great if you get things in specifications during design because that helps the contractor have leverage when they're doing bidding. But it's also very important that there's language in that bid document that the supplier is going to read and act on. So this is, again, available on the Building Transparency website. This is actual some template language for bid documents. The approach that this has taken that's been successful is just saying, do you have an EPD? Yes, no. Would you invest in getting an EPD? Yes, no. Would you charge the project for that investment? Again, just another lever where we're including this language in all of our bidding. And the last step of that is really using the data that we get back for decision making. So this is where we actually did performance-based concrete specifications. We requested EPDs because we knew that we had 3 suppliers in the database for Washington that could actually provide EPDs for concrete mixes. And we used that information for those representative mixes to get to reductions against the baseline and against the industry average. So the case here was supplier A, the lowest carbon supplier was also the lowest cost. So we were able to achieve this reduction just by the fact that we asked and could actually assess it next to cost, and they knew we were being competitive about it. The last thing is once you've actually confirmed your installed products, you can go back into your project in EC3, click the search button again, and actually go select the EPD used. So for each of your line items of material quantities, you can select the actual procured material with the attached EPD. And what that's going to do is allow you to look at what you've selected versus the baseline. And this is really what we want everyone to be able to do at the end of the day is not just forecast how we could make these things better, but what did we actually achieve? And really we see that is really through environmental product declarations, just like we look at toxicity and other things for lead. If we can get submittals with EPDs and really account for our savings, we're going to move the market. And this really gets into, how this all works together. Just like circular economy, when you reuse materials, you are reducing those upfront emissions by not starting from scratch and extracting and manufacturing new stuff. As we start to procure and incentivize procurement of low carbon materials, what's going to happen is all of these manufacturers are going to compete. They're going to create lower carbon products that then is able to move the baseline down and actually move everything down closer to zero. And if you think about this is just like operational energy, where we're starting where we are, and as we get better and we optimize efficiencies and we find better performing products, we can reduce that baseline and get closer to zero and hopefully meet our targets. The last thing I was going to do really quickly, because I really think this is important. If you are building a project and you see 3 or you'd like to, there are a couple of templates available that give you a starting point where it sets up the whole project planner for you. And the other thing I wanted to show is just if you go now into the tool under Manage Data, there are some good graphics in terms of distribution of EPDs. This is the one that comes on the landing screen. But if you click on Manage Data, you'll see here's the number of EPDs we have in the system total. Here's what that looks like from a plants and manufacturers perspective per material category. And then here's what it looks like from a kind of a global spread. So we're starting to bring in EPDs from outside the States, but really in the States, there are hotspots. There are lots of places where we need EPDs. This should all of a sudden turn dark blue at some point where we have the data that we need from everywhere. So please do start making that ask, and let's really start procuring low carbon materials and send the trigger to the market.
Awesome, thank you, everyone. We have a few questions, so I will try to move through them. Chen Quinn asks, could you share impact on the project schedule of starting the discussion on sustainability goals EC early in the process? And then we had a sort of related question, which was about, would the recommendation be to bring the CM on board during schematic design? What are the benefits of having the CM so early? So Michael, why don't we start with you, and then each one of you can possibly add to this.
Sure. So the earlier you bring us on, the easier it is. It makes kind of our lives a lot easier to really, when we're going through this, to even from just a constructability standpoint or basic, if we're not doing anything with body carbon or sustainability. But when bringing in early and really working through, especially with schedule, the earlier the better. With the biotech firm in Cambridge, this was addressed in the first OAC meeting, and we were able to kind of fit the schedule around that. The later you go, the kind of much harder it gets. I imagine any of the CM can say this, and trying to change the schedule. So if it's early enough, it won't change the schedule at all. And depending on the availability of certain procurement items, it can actually benefit your schedule. There is the case where if you're procuring an item that is, for some reason, much longer lead time or much more complex to get, requires a lot more approvals, it could bump the schedule up. But from what I've seen, the earlier you bring the CM on and the earlier you discuss these sustainability and lowering carbon goals, the better it can be. And oftentimes, especially if you're trying to find items that you don't have to transport as far, it can bring the schedule down if that item is on the critical path.
Brian, as a design builder, how would you answer this question?
Yeah, I think schematic design is a great place at the end. That's a good spot to bring construction management into the conversation. And as far as schedule goes, I really think that an integrated design process that is robust and aware does not, actually could accelerate a schedule, but it certainly isn't detrimental. It's not a built-in delay because it is a longer process. And I think there's a lot that comes out of that. If you're trying to really doing a good job of being comprehensive and doing all the things that we should be doing, everything goes off from there on out and down the line more efficiently and better. So that's my opinion.
Stacy, do you want to add anything?
Just that I agree. I think, wearing my SKANSKA hat, we typically are not bid builders. We are brought on as, you know, GCCM or doing some kind of pre-construction work because we see the value for our clients in giving them cost certainty. And I think we can think of embodied carbon and other things as something else we can bring certainty around. The earlier you start, the more certainty you're going to have.
Yeah, and I would just add, through our healthier materials work, what we know is, to the extent that we can actually specify those materials in the specifications, name them, product and manufacturer, that streamlines the whole process, right? Whenever we add to the subcontractor's scope of work, we're automatically going to increase the time, the length of time typically that it's going to take, just because if they're not used to being asked for EPDs, then that's just going to take them a longer time frame to get caught up. I have another question here from Henry Moss, and it's, how can we help manufacturers of CLT and low carbon concrete and other products to step up production availability and competitive prices in New England? And I think what we'll hear about from you guys is advocacy and the importance of letting manufacturers and providers of these right now maybe novel products know that it's our intention to be using these products, specifying these products, and just raising that awareness and therefore the market demand.
I would second that, Lisa. That's correct. I think what we're finding right now is there have to be kind of the leaders that can spend a little more if they need to for some of these really innovative products. So I want to say, first of all, right now, without cost, there's huge reductions to be had just based on things that exist right now. So taking account for that first kind of reduction that we can just do by having data of comparable carpets or 3 suppliers of concretes without doing anything crazy, do that first, because that's 30 to 50% off the top. And then as we start to get to the point where we need more, we need things to actually innovate. There are very big owners and companies now that are committed to this, that can send the market signal that we will pay a premium because we know the reductions they're achieving. As they start purchasing the products, it then allows the business case to grow for that actual supplier of that material, which then reduces the cost for everyone else. So there is this kind of first mover leadership thing that needs to happen when it comes to the actual, you know, purchase from large companies building large projects.
Great. So Margaret has a question about reuse of materials, and the example she has is of, you know, if you're buying salvage wood for flooring and the cost of that seems more expensive, right? Because there's labor involved in refurbishing that board. So can any of you take this on? I mean, I think, again, it possibly depends on the product type that we're talking about, and how much work has to be done to refurbish that product and make it usable in a new setting. And certainly floors would be, you know, would need more conditioning and more attention perhaps than say if we were able to salvage something like plywood, which we could use for backer board or other applications where it doesn't matter, right? What you know, really what condition it's in, other than structurally it's sound. So does anybody want to jump in on this?
If it's all right, I might take a quick shot at this. So one thing I found, and I'll eventually get back to this, is there's the concept of, I think a lot of people know, it's like a very circular economy, and being able to contribute to that by different programs, as I had mentioned mine, kind of the carpet tile recycling and kind of waste diversion from landfills. In doing more of these programs, in advocating for these, we're able to put both more products that can be reused, but also show that different manufacturers, producers need to kind of get on this. And by showing the need for this, so the new wood you're buying goes through this very intense and exhaustive process that's been refined over multiple years, and it can bring the price down. So by adding to this new kind of circular economy thought, and these salvage products and these kind of reclaimed and diverted from waste landfills, that can bring the price down because manufacturers see there's a desire for this, there's a need for this. How can we put in our efforts to make money off this? And that can make a competitive market and kind of bring the price down a little bit. that's what I'm seeing, especially with my efforts of kind of diverting waste and kind of trying to reclaim and recycle more and more from at least the construction sites that we demo.
Stacy, there's time if you want to show the slide that some people are referring to in the chat.
Sure, yeah, so this is just, hopefully you can see this now.
Can everyone else see it? I'm stuck.
I can see it.
Yes.
Okay, yes, this is just when you're on the landing page of EC3, what shows up is this graph right here, which is all the EPDs we currently have, and it's dynamic, so it constantly is aggregating more and more and more as we get them. This is my curator view, so you're seeing all the categories that aren't published publicly alongside the public ones. This is really what the database looks like right now. If you click on Manage Data over here on the left-hand side, we've added some more graphs in. So this is where I was talking about it, but you couldn't see it. So there's the first one of just number of EPDs per category. Then there's plants and manufacturers per category. So you can see how many actual manufacturers we have for each of these things and how many plants they're reporting. How many EPDs we have per country. So the darker the color, the more we have. And then per county. So this is where it gets into just adoption. You're seeing it happen. It's spreading like wildfire over here on the West Coast, which is great. We're getting little pockets in other places around certain cities or places. And we just want this to continue just to turn darker blue everywhere. For concrete, for regional materials, this is important when it comes to having specific EPDs for each place, similar, for fabrication and mill sites for steel, et cetera, et cetera. So this needs to turn dark blue. I was trying to show you this earlier, but you can go in and see this for yourself and see how it starts to grow and spread since it's dynamic based on the database.
Wonderful. I am going to take us out with hopefully successfully thanking all the panelists first and foremost for being with us today and sharing their wisdom and sharing also their questions. We're all on a journey here. We don't have perfect answers. We are all trying to figure it out. And that's why joining the Carbon Leadership Forum and other collaboratives where we're coming together and sharing best practices and information is super important right now, especially if we're going to really accelerate embodied carbon as a consideration in our practice. I'd like to thank our sponsors today and for their continued support throughout the summer series, as well as our partners. And I'd like to remind you that you still have a little time to put your AIA number and your email address and your name in the Google form. If you somehow miss it, you can always get in touch with Caitlin Hart at BSA. She has sent you the email for today's session. And please join us next Monday for carbon accounting from 3 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we'll have Lori Ferris, Jacob Rakusin, and Maggie Wildner, who will be sharing sort of the nitty gritty. This is where it gets nerdy. So if you've been waiting for the data and the real nerdiness around embodied carbon, join us starting next week. Thank you all, and stay cool, and look forward to hearing about the projects that you're all working on and the good work you're doing around embodied carbon. Bye.